Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Stamberger. I will be your virtual PowerPoint teacher for this lesson. This is the pre-lesson for your upcoming Tualatin River Farm Exploration Field Trip. We are really excited to see you soon at the farm, which you can see in the picture in the bottom of this slide. This farm is owned by Clean Water Services, which is a local organization that helps protect and improve water quality and watershed health and environmental health in your community. They are managing the Tualatin River Farm to help improve all of those things, and you are stakeholders in your community who have the power to help make recommendations to Clean Water Services in how they can improve the health of our public water quality and environmental health through their management decisions at the farm. So we'll be bringing you out to Tualatin River Farm soon, where I hope we can meet in person, and you will be going on a site tour and helping to make a site plan for the farm, which we will be giving to Clean Water Services, and they will use to help make management decisions on behalf of the public for how to improve environmental health here at Tualatin River Farm. I'm also working with Friends of Trees and Tualatin River Keepers on this project. Both are nonprofits in your area that help protect environmental health, create wildlife habitat, plant lots and lots of trees, and help educate the public, like yourself, on ways that you can be empowered and take initiative and ownership to help improve environmental health in your own community. So what we'll be doing together today in this pre-lesson is you should have a lab packet in front of you that has lots of definitions that have blank spaces or gray boxes next to them. Your job as we go along in this presentation is to fill in those boxes with the correct word, vocabulary word that goes with the definition. So pay close attention as we're talking so you don't miss any. Learning these definitions and background information will help you to be ready to go when we're out together at the farm soon. What I'd like us to start with thinking about today is the qualities of a healthy river. Here's a list you see below of some of the things that I think we have as qualities of healthy rivers in our area. The qualities of healthy rivers in our area are unique, different than different places in the world. West of the Cascades and north of San Francisco in our little area, the Pacific Northwest, our rivers are healthy when they have a certain list of characteristics. You can probably think of some other ones as we go along, but this is a partial list that I have made of some of the characteristics of healthy rivers, as I think they are. First of all, water in our healthy rivers is clean, clear, and cold here. You may remember that from your time in outdoor school, that the way salmon like our water to be in our rivers in the Pacific Northwest is clean, clear, and cold, the 3 C's. Secondly, healthy rivers in our area are big and wide and curvy and have room to meander and flood. Floodplains, which are low-lying areas next to our rivers and also often are sometimes wetlands, are areas where water can flood out of the river. It can go over the stream banks and flood out during a major flood event. We only think of floods as bad, and they are bad when people and homes are in the floodplains as well. But floodplains are really normal for rivers and an important part of healthy rivers. Floodplains, when water floods into them, allow water from big rain events to get filtered by plants and soaked back into the ground. A lot of the sediment in floodwaters is deposited, which helps provide fertile farmland for later. And also, wetlands and floodplains are really important habitat, wildlife habitat. Healthy streams also have really large riparian buffer zones. The word riparian just means next to a stream. Riparian buffer zones are made of plants, trees, shrubs, ground covers that filter pollution and provide shade to help keep water in our streams clean, clear, and cold. Healthy streams also have low amounts of stormwater runoff. I'm going to give you a moment to think about what stormwater means. Stormwater is just what it sounds like, water from storms, rainwater from storms. And stormwater runoff is water that doesn't soak in and washes off into our waterways. Think for a moment about what kinds of surfaces might cause water to run off instead of soaking into the ground. Types of surfaces that don't allow water to soak in are also called impervious surfaces. These surfaces are things like rooftops, driveways, parking lots, concrete, asphalt, things that we humans put down on the ground that doesn't allow water to soak in. Too much stormwater runoff from surfaces like these is bad for the health of rivers. So we like to see in a healthy stream that there are low amounts of stormwater runoff. We also don't want to see a lot of pollution in our healthy rivers. Pollution comes from many sources in the world, but largely it comes from human activity. Now, before I advance to the next slide, I want you to spend a second thinking in your head to yourself why you care about having healthy rivers and streams in your community. Why do we care about this? So we care about the health of rivers for many reasons. One of them, we like to eat, right? We like to fish in the rivers and eat the fish that come out of them, like the salmon pictured here in the bottom of this slide. Salmon are really, really important to our local food web. Our local ecosystem depends largely on salmon existing. Salmon don't exist in most parts of the world. We are really, really lucky to have them here, but they are disappearing because our rivers could be healthier. Who eats salmon? I invite you to think about. People eat salmon. Bears eat salmon. Birds eat salmon. Even small, juvenile, young baby salmon eat their adult salmon, their parent salmon, once those salmon lay their eggs and die. Even trees are dependent upon the decomposing bodies of salmon once they spawn and lay their eggs and die. Tiny, tiny little particles of salmon have actually been found in the tissues of trees, showing how they are connected. Salmon end up in the trees, the nutrients end up in the trees because everybody eats salmon, as we've talked about before, and then they poop it out in the woods, and those trees have evolved to use those nutrients from salmon to grow. We also, in addition to wanting to protect our entire food web and everything that depends on salmon and other animals that live in our rivers, enjoy recreating on our rivers as well, and they need to be healthy and clean for those things as well, like boating and swimming. Another big thing to remember is that we also drink this water. It's important to take care of and keep this water clean, clear, and cold for ourselves as well. So when we turn on the tap, we can be sure that we have done our part to help protect that drinking water for ourselves and for our communities into the future. Now, before I advance to the next slide, I want you to think about for a second what impacts the health of a river. Is it what goes on inside the river, or is it what goes on around it? What affects the health of a river is what happens in the watershed around it. So what is a watershed then? Is a watershed made of land, or is it made of water? A watershed is made of land. It is the land that drains to a common body of water. It can be thought of as a small drainage sink, for example, except that it's hilly and mountainous and has trees and other things inside of it. As you can see in this picture, watersheds start really tiny and they get bigger and bigger and bigger on their way to the ocean. You can see the tiniest little watersheds, tiny patches of land high in the mountains that drain to a small creek or stream. Those streams join bigger watersheds to drain into a larger stream, which drains into a larger river, which eventually drains into the ocean. We are all in a watershed everywhere we are in the world. There is no place on earth that is not a watershed. Even the desert receives some precipitation, and that water flows some direction into some water body. So I invite you to think about right now, what watershed are you in right this moment? Watersheds are typically named after the body of water that they drain into. So you can answer this question by thinking about what is the closest creek to your school. I will allow your teacher to pause and discuss this for a moment. Another important thing to think about when we think about river health are floodplains. I mentioned these earlier. Floodplains are low-lying areas next to a river that flood when it rains. Floods we think of as a bad thing all the time, but floods really are a natural part of watershed health that allow rivers to slow down, allow rivers to filter the water and soak it back into the ground from the flood instead of sending it all off to the ocean right away. Floodplains are also very often the same as wetlands, big, wet areas that provide excellent habitat for fish and wildlife. Now let's look at some pictures of local watersheds together and think about how what's going on in the watershed might be affecting the health of the river. So here is a river in our area. I'll give you a second to think about and see if you can guess which river this is. This is the Columbia River, the big river that divides Oregon from Washington in our area and drains out into the Pacific Ocean. The watershed for the Columbia River takes up most of Oregon and Washington, drains into this river. So think about what you see going on in the watershed, the area around the river that might impact watershed health. We won't talk about it much, but that big thing in the middle of the river is the Bonneville Dam here. The Bonneville Dam provides most of our electricity in the Portland metro area. It also comes with some environmental impacts. Dams tend to keep fish from moving either upstream to spawn and lay their eggs and die, like salmon, or from moving downstream, like salmon also do when they are small and they're on their way to the ocean. A lot has been done around the Bonneville Dam to help improve fish passage, both going up and downstream. But today we're really going to focus a lot more on how the land around a stream or river is impacting the water quality as opposed to what's happening inside of it. Let's look back at our list of qualities of a healthy river and compare what we see in this picture of the Columbia River to see if we can tell how healthy this river might be. Do you think what's going on in the watershed around this river will help provide runoff water to the river that is clean, clear, and cold? Possibly. There are a lot of trees that could filter that water and provide shade. How about, does the river appear to have space to meander, to express its personality, to have wavy, curvy shapes, and have wide access to its floodplains? Somewhat, it looks like. The river is curvy. All right, does the watershed around this river appear to have large riparian buffer zones? Are there lots of plants that could filter and provide shade? Yes, there do appear to be. How about, does it appear that there are a lot of surfaces, impervious surfaces, that might be causing stormwater runoff? There are definitely some rooftops, roadways, parking lots, but not as much as we might see in other areas. And how about, do there appear to be a lot of potential sources of pollution around this river from humans? It appears that there might be some, yes, but again, let's take a look at a different watershed and see what we think. I'll give you a moment to think about which river this is. The river in the picture is the Willamette River in downtown Portland. In fact, I live in this picture somewhere near Lloyd Center. The biggest bridge you see on the left is the Fremont Bridge. So I invite you to think about now, what are some of the things going on in this watershed that could impact watershed health, stream health? Let's go back to our list again and compare it. So in this watershed, do you think that what's happening in this watershed, what's going on, is going to provide water to the river that is clean, clear, and cold? Probably not very clean, clear, and cold, seeing as it's coming from an urban area. Does this river appear to have space to meander, to be wide and curvy, to flood if it needs to filter out water from those floods? No. In fact, if you've been to downtown Portland, you've seen those walls, the big walls that we've created around this river to control where it goes and to keep it from flooding into our cities, which is also important. How about, does this river have a large riparian buffer zone? Is there a lot of plants and trees along the edges to help filter and provide shade to keep the water clean? Not especially. There are a lot of trees in Portland, but there's also a lot of other surfaces, impervious surfaces that we've talked about, that cause and contribute to polluted stormwater runoff in our urban environments. And does this river, the Willamette here, appear to have a lot of sources of pollution in its watershed potentially? The answer to that is yes. There are quite a few people living around this watershed, putting things in and on the ground that can wash off and cause pollution in the Willamette River. So here's basically the difference in a diagram form of an urban versus a forested watershed. On the left side of the screen, you see a forested watershed. In forested watersheds, trees soak up tons and millions of gallons of stormwater runoff, rainfall, every year. They release a lot of this back to the atmosphere in a process known as evapotranspiration. Lots of water also, because there are so many tree roots and because the soil is open to infiltration, lots of this water infiltrates deep into the ground. We see here about 50%. And there is very little water that is not used and that runs off of the landscape into rivers and streams. In an urban watershed, we see exactly the opposite. On the right side of the screen here, you can see a picture of an urban watershed. In urban watersheds, we have, and not because we don't like watersheds, just because we didn't know any better, we've cut down a lot of the trees, we've removed a lot of the plants that soak up all that water, and then we've paved over the surfaces with impervious surface that does not allow water to soak into the ground. So now in an urban watershed, what we're seeing is much less water infiltrating into the soil and much more water running off as stormwater runoff into our rivers and streams. So let's review now really quickly the difference between an impervious surface and a pervious surface. Think for a second about what you think those definitions mean. You may also find spaces for them on your lab packet. Impervious surfaces are surfaces that do not allow any water to pass through into the soil below. These are like rooftops, parking lots, driveways, etc. The picture on the bottom left shows examples of impervious surfaces, asphalt running off into that storm drain, including that man's umbrella. You can help remember what impervious means by thinking about the saying, I am impervious to insult. That means your insults do not get through to me. Kind of like the I'm rubber, you're glue, what bounces off of me sticks to you kind of saying. Pervious surfaces are the exact opposite. They can be thought of like the other P words that mean the same thing. Permeable, porous. These are surfaces that do allow water to soak through into the soil below. The picture in the bottom right shows examples of pervious surfaces like gardens, pathways, grass, etc. The way our urban watersheds work is they generate a lot of stormwater runoff, as we talked about a moment before. This stormwater runoff collects everything on the ground that is not locked down to the surface and carries it, as you can see in the top picture, to storm drains in our parking lots and roadways. Those storm drains lead to pipes underground that carry water, as you can see in the picture below, directly to our local rivers and streams. Now, I happen to personally know a number of scientists whose job it is to go out into the local rivers and streams around here and take samples and take them to a lab to analyze what kind of pollution is found from stormwater in our local rivers and streams that we fish in, that we swim in, that we eat out of, right? That we drink sometimes, and hopefully not too much of when we're out inner tubing. So pollution that washes off into stormwater is known as stormwater pollution. It's also called non-point source pollution, which just means it's a type of pollution that you can't point at the actual source of. It's not pollution coming out of one factory, out of one pipe. Stormwater pollution is non-point source pollution because it's coming from many different points, many different sources around the landscape. So the most common types of non-point source pollution that we see in our waterways that scientist friends of mine have located are as follows. Fertilizers and pesticides. These are coming from our farms, our gardens, our lawns that we put fertilizers and pesticides on. And pesticides are known to be toxic to fish, and they're being investigated for potentially being toxic to humans as well. A second big source of pollution is animal waste, and by that I do mean poop. The two major culprits for poop ending up in our waterways are birds, number one, and dogs, number two. Birds are a problem because we like to feed things like ducks and geese in our ponds, who then don't migrate naturally like they would and sit in ponds instead and poop all year long. Dog poop is washing off of our landscapes from people who aren't picking up after their pets after they use the bathroom on walks or in parks. The problem with these two things being in our water is that they contribute bacteria like fecal coliform and E. coli. Those two bacteria are things that restaurants will be shut down for or fined if they find them in their kitchens because they're the bacteria that cause food poisoning. So we don't want this in our rivers either while we're trying to tube or boat or swim. Another big source of pollution in our rivers is soap. Where would soap be coming from? That's right, it comes from people washing their cars in the street. So you're washing your car and the soap is flowing away and it's going somewhere, right? It's going, we now know, to those storm drains in the street, which go directly into local rivers and streams. Soap is a problem because it kills stream macroinvertebrates. Those are stream insects that live in the water, on which salmon and lots of other animals depend for their food source. So this is a food web problem, because who eats fish? Everybody, even trees, right? So another source of water pollution that we have problems with in our streams are oil and other car fluids. So that beautiful rainbow you see in the top picture, right, that we see flowing down pavement when it rains, is oil and gasoline flowing from cars. We know that those types of things that come from cars, waste products that come from cars, contain heavy metals and hydrocarbons, petroleum byproducts that are known to cause cancer or ending up in our waterways and are known to be toxic to fish. In the top picture, you see all that black, greasy grit that's around the storm drain. So that is an accumulation of dust from our brake pads from our cars. So every time we use our brakes in our car, we wear down the brake pads a tiny, tiny bit, which is why we have to get them replaced every once in a while. But when we wear down those brake pads, that dust that's produced, that's rubbing off the brake pads, is ending up on our streets and on our parking lots. That dust contains lots of heavy metals in it, so copper, lead, mercury, zinc, these kinds of things. And when they wash off into waterways, they're known to be cancer-causing, which is a problem, but scientists have recently found that tiny, tiny amounts of metals like copper and zinc dissolved in the rivers can cause salmon to not be able to smell their way back home when they want to lay their eggs and die to the place they were born, and also keeps juvenile salmon from being able to smell predators in the water, meaning they're getting eaten more often. So there's fewer salmon because of our brake pads. Another major pollution source that we find in our rivers and streams comes from household hazardous waste. What I mean by that is when you're done with a chemical that you don't want anymore, for example, oil or antifreeze or paint, a lot of people will pour those things down the storm drains because they're done with them and they think the storm drains go to either a treatment plant to get cleaned or go to a garbage can or something. They aren't aware, as we are now, that those drains go directly to local streams. So only water should ever go down the drain, which includes things like hail and snow and that kind of thing, ice, but only water should ever go down that drain. Now, the final type of pollution that we find in our rivers and streams from stormwater is the sheer volume of water that's washing off into our rivers and streams all at one time. That's not getting soaked in. Instead, is washing off of our impervious surfaces from rooftops, parking lots, and heading directly to local creeks. This huge volume of stormwater runoff that hits our creeks erodes the stream banks, as you can see in the top right picture. Makes it really hard for streams to connect to those floodplains we talked about, those wetlands where they can flood during a big rain event. Instead, the stream sides get scoured, and all that eroded dirt and soil ends up in the stream, as you can see in the bottom picture. And instead of having rivers that are clean, clear, and cold, as we're supposed to in our climate, we end up with rivers that look more like chocolate milk. The problem with this is similar to if we were inside your classroom right now and we lit a bonfire. But we kept all of the windows and doors shut the entire time, so the room fills with smoke, and we start to cough and it starts to irritate our lungs from breathing in all that smoke. So it's the same experience that salmon are having when they're in muddy water. They like clean, clear, and cold water, right? So for them, it's like being trapped in a room full of smoke. It irritates their gills. Also, the sediment in the water, in the muddy water, can settle out and suffocate their eggs. Here's another example of a watershed. What kinds of things could be happening in this watershed? This is the Grand Round River in Oregon that might be impacting watershed health. What are those big, beautiful green squares on the screen? Those are farms. So farming does impact watershed health by contributing fertilizers and pesticides and soils in runoff that wash off directly into these rivers and streams. We also don't see a huge riparian buffer zone, a big strip of trees around this river. Big strips of trees around rivers in rural areas like this really help filter those pollutants from runoff. How about this watershed? What kinds of impacts do you think this neon green, beautiful lawn and all these exotic landscape plants might have on the watershed nearby? What might be being put on this landscape that might wash off into waterways to make it so green and lush? Pesticides and fertilizers again. It's important to remember that anything that ends with a side, pesticide, fungicide, herbicide, all of those sides are things that are designed to kill other things. Pesticides are often used on our lawns and landscapes to help keep other plants from growing there, to help keep any bugs that might hurt our grass from growing there, all to keep this beautiful green lawn. Fertilizers are also used to feed the grass to make it that bright green color. As we've talked about before, pesticides are known to be dangerous to fish and thought to be dangerous to people as well, and known to be some of them that we can buy in the store. Companies, when they come to our houses to apply fertilizers and pesticides, sometimes have to put little signs in our yard that say, "Danger, do not have any children or pets on this lawn until it is dry," because of how dangerous those chemicals can be to people and pets. So here we are purchasing these chemicals from the store, and the ones that we're allowed to use in our lawns and landscapes have much higher concentrations of toxins than what farmers are allowed to use on their fields. So even though we have tiny amounts of landscape compared to them, we can still be having as big of an impact on pollution. So here we are buying these things from the store. They cost money, and then we're applying them to our landscapes, and then they're dangerous to us and our pets, and then they wash off into waterways where they're toxic to fish. So now that I've adequately terrified you about water quality, I want to let you know that there are ways that we can all help. We can all help with stewardship. Stewardship means caring for something that you care about, helping to protect something that you care about. In this case, the health of our rivers and streams. And that means what goes on in our watershed around our streams, which we all impact and we can all take ownership over. Everything we do and put on our landscapes is part of watershed health, contributes to watershed health. So we can be part of the problem or we can be part of the solution. The things that we can do to help improve the health of our rivers and streams in our watershed is 1, reduce the sources of stormwater pollution that are washing off of our surfaces, those things that aren't locked down on our surfaces like pesticides and fertilizers and dog poop and soap from washing cars. We can reduce those sources in the first place that wash off. Secondly, we can plant plants. So this is about recreating that forested watershed we saw back in that diagram that's covered in trees and plants to help soak up stormwater runoff and to help filter pollution, and to help provide shade to keep our water clean, clear, and cold. The third thing that we can do is continue to protect and restore those areas we have, those floodplains, those wetlands, those forests that are already doing all those valuable ecosystem services like filtering pollution, soaking up stormwater, helping water soak into the ground, etc. Again, what I meant by natural area restoration is the human management of nature to try and improve and restore its natural function. So restoration is something that we as humans are doing. We do a lot of this in Oregon to try and protect our environment. We do a lot of forest and wetland restoration in Oregon. Oftentimes, forest and wetland restoration includes removing invasive plant species, replanting with native plant species, and increasing wildlife habitat. The picture in the bottom right corner is a Pacific chorus frog. It is the only frog in our area that makes sounds. So when you hear a frog, you are hearing this little guy right here. He's identifiable by his raccoon-like bandit mask. So what is a native plant? I just talked about that in the slide before. A native plant is a plant that has evolved here for millions of years and is really happy in our climate. These are some pictures of native plants in our area. The bottom picture is a trillium flower. They're flowering right now. The top picture has lots of things in it, including the clover, known as Oregon oxalis, and wild ginger, and also bleeding hearts. These native plants are resistant to local pests and disease, and they love our soil because they've been here so long. So native plants don't actually need fertilizers and pesticides to do really well in our climate. They're beautiful and great for your lawn and landscape, and they don't require those things that can be dangerous for watershed health and for people. What's more, native animals that also evolved here over millions of years have come to depend on native plants that are from here for their food, water, shelter, and places to raise their young, for their habitat. So planting native plants in your landscape is a great way to attract birds and butterflies and other animals like frogs and salamanders, etc. to your landscape. What is an invasive plant? The exact opposite of a native plant. These are plants that we brought here from other places. They did not originate or evolve here over time. It is not their fault. Humans brought them over for food, or for landscaping, or sometimes just their seeds stuck to our shoes when we came here on a boat. Unfortunately, because they don't have any pests or diseases that keep them in check here, they can take over and crowd out and smother out our native plant species. Invasive weeds are also typically not as good for our native wildlife. Because our native wildlife did not evolve with them over time, they don't know to expect food or shelter from them, and they don't get as much wildlife habitat value. Not to mention, if an invasive weed crowds out and destroys all the native plants that wildlife do depend on, we have a problem where there's not enough food for wildlife, not enough wildlife habitat. What is wildlife habitat? It's exactly what I've been describing. Is any environment that provides food, shelter, and places for wild animals to raise their young. Native plants, as I've just talked about from Oregon, if we plant them here, they help provide wildlife habitat. Other types of things we like to see in wildlife habitat here in Oregon are dead trees and logs, ponds and wetlands, and forests with lots of different plant species in them. And when we talk about wildlife, we are not just concerned about habitat for birds and mammals. We're also concerned about insects, and we have to remember that insects are a really important part of our food webs and our ecosystems. They provide the bottom of the food chain. They feed everybody, who in turn other people eat, etc. They also pollinate our food crops, like bees and butterflies, and even beetles and flies. All help provide the pollination that we require to make fruits and vegetables that we eat. Also, some insects eat other insects, and some of those insects that are eaten are the pest insects. So the more good insects we have around, the less pesticides we need to use, because those insects eat our pest insects instead. However, if we use pesticides kill lots and lots of insects, even the beneficial ones that we need, like pollinators and those insects that eat other insects that are a problem. All of this ties into the concept of biodiversity. We want to see high biodiversity in the world. What biodiversity means is it's the variety of different organisms in a place. This picture here on the left really helps describe biodiversity. This is just a drawing of moss biodiversity. Lots and lots of different species of moss. One of the reasons biodiversity is important, it's important for many reasons, is that many species depend on many other species for their survival, as we've talked about. Some species eat other species, some species live inside other species, some species build their nests on tree species, etc. So biodiversity is very important to have a diversity of plants and animals that are surviving. Habitat and natural area restoration of forests and wetlands and floodplains is really partially trying to increase the amount of biodiversity we see out there in our forests and our natural areas. So talking about biodiversity in forests, the plant species in forests can be put into 3 canopy layers or categories based on their size and shape. Forest scientists do this a lot to help measure the biodiversity in a forest. A healthy forest will have plant species in all 3 categories in our area. These categories are trees, shrubs, and ground covers. Trees are typically big and tall. You know what they look like. You know a tree when you see it. It has a single stem that is really woody. Shrubs are shorter typically, and they have many stems that are also woody. Ground covers are typically kind of herbaceous. They can be woody, but they often are more grass-like, more succulent, for example, vegetative instead of woody, and they crawl along and cover the ground. Biodiversity in forests is also really important, or among plants in general is also very important, not just for what you can see going on above the ground, but for what goes on below the ground. Different plants, especially native plants, have different sizes and shapes and widths and diameters and patterns of roots underneath the ground, which are really, really important to supporting a biodiversity of soil microbes under the ground to have healthy soil. Having a diversity of root depths and breadths and sizes is also really important to helping water soak into the ground instead of running off. So I want to talk about forest succession a tiny bit with you before we wrap up. Forest succession is the stages that forests go through as they age and mature. They have ages just like people and stages. They go through being young, they go through being adolescent, they go through being middle-aged, and they go through being mature or old. In our area, young forests have lots of deciduous trees in them. Do you remember what the difference is between a deciduous tree and a coniferous tree? A deciduous tree has leaves that fall off in the wintertime, and a coniferous tree has evergreen needles on it that never go away in most trees, and they produce cones. Older forests in our area have lots of coniferous trees like Douglas firs. Here this is illustrated in a diagram of the stages from a field to a mature forest, the evolution of forest succession. It starts as a field, it starts to get some shrubs in it and becomes a young forest with deciduous trees. Then as those trees die out, because they don't live very long, as they die out, they make space for those small coniferous trees that were hiding in their shadow to become big, tall trees and become our mature forest full of coniferous trees that we see here in our area. So now that I've wrapped up all the vocabulary, thank you so much for your attention. I want to tell you that we need your help. As I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, really soon you will visit the Tualatin River Farm with your class that I showed you in the first slide, the picture of the farm. Clean Water Services, which is a local organization that is managing Tualatin River Farm, needs your help in developing their master plan that they will use to help improve watershed health at the farm. You at the farm will be performing site evaluations, checking out the farm, writing down and making notes and drawing your ideas to make recommendations for forest restoration on the farm, for stormwater runoff reduction projects on the farm, and for watershed-friendly farming projects on the farm. The information and ideas that you provide are going to be used to help improve watershed health on the farm and in your community. We are so excited to have you out at the farm and to have your help. You are an important part of helping to protect and improve watershed health and environmental health in your community. See you soon. I look forward to meeting you.